Good evening and welcome to our weekly book study here at the New Covenant House. We're doing this to number one. We open up our windows here at New Covenant House so you get an idea what we are like, what the values and beliefs we have here. Should you decide to investigate the possibility of joining us here as a member, or you simply just like to do Bible study, then that's fine too. We're studying Christian Anarchism by Alexander Christianopoulos, who wrote the book as part of his doctoral thesis, and it's very interesting. So we have now almost finished with the first chapter, and we will be continuing because there's some very interesting things in the second chapter as well. To be able to continue with us here, you are going to need the book. Because the second chapter is not included in the download that we have in the description of the event. So if you want to continue with us in about 2 weeks or so, you're going to need a book, or at the very least you're going to need a Bible probably. But today we're going to go through a very challenging passage here in Matthew 5, verses 17 to 20, and this is where Jesus talks about destroying or fulfilling the law. So I struggle with this personally. It was very difficult for me to make sense of the writing in this particular passage in the book. But that's not unusual. This is a passage that theologians have been struggling with for decades, even centuries already, and there's no shame in struggling with it. So what it deals with basically is the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Is the New Testament replacing the Old Testament? And Jesus is saying that it's not. It's fulfilling the Old Testament, which at least the portion of it that's the law. You know that the Old Testament is comprised of a few things. There's the law attributed to Moses, and there's the prophets, and there's the writings. The writings are the Psalms and the Proverbs, I think. Yeah. But the law is like a second, a big portion of the Old Testament. So this is Matthew 5, verses 17 to 20, and we're reading from the New King James Version, because that is the one that Tolstoy used in his writings. Tolstoy, as we have mentioned several times before, is the premier writer among Christian anarchists. No one else goes as deep as he does. So, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you, that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And so for a change, the anarchist writers disagree pretty wildly about this passage. And it's no wonder, because there's like two things that are contradictory. So here the book says, they make two broad sets of first seemingly contradictory comments on these verses. They often insist that Jesus is still marking a break with the Old Testament, but they explain the way in which this nevertheless amounts to a fulfillment of it. So, at least some of them say that there's a big break between the New Testament and the Old Testament, but somehow it comes together at the end anyway. One of the first writer that he's talking about here is Eliphat. I'm not sure exactly who he is, but he writes, and he takes the position that he characterizes Jesus almost as a politician who is speaking out of both sides of his mouth. So he says something like this, because Jesus could not very well denounce the law, because that would be definitely an affront to the leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, and he would definitely get in deep trouble if he did that. So he says, Jesus' strategy in this respect was publicly to declare that he was not concerned to change anything, but was on the contrary a staunch defender of the orthodoxy. Yet at the same time, in the verses which immediately follow these, Jesus takes some of the particular requirements of orthodoxy and begins to radically reinterpret them. So he's saying that Jesus has to say, or is kind of needs to say that he is not going to change the law, or the law is invalid, because that would get him in deep trouble. So he does reinterpret the law. And then comes Balu. Balu is, I read something about him, and it turns out that he is sort of a mentor for Tolstoy. So Tolstoy is pretty influenced by him, and they seem to agree on the thing that Jesus is in fact saying that he is come to abolish the law. At least that's how I read this text here. The great master of Christians has abrogated it, he says. Abrogated is another word for abolish, destroy. For example, so far as Moses and his expounders enjoined the inclination of penal personal injuries in resistance of injuries and for the suppression of evil doing, Jesus Christ prohibits the same. So he's saying that he's really abrogating the old law because it permits the things that Jesus is saying are no good anymore. So, in other words, he says there's a big break between the old law and the new. He continues, the whole prohibition of resistance to evil is made precisely coextensive in all its bearings with the allowances and injunctions of the olden code. Jesus' prohibition of oaths, resistance, and hatred of enemies now applies to the very same extent that the old law permitted them. So there is this opposite situation between them. Tolstoy insists that the old law is incompatible with Jesus' instructions and that is impossible to abide by both. He has Jesus say, so in other words, Tolstoy is interpreting Jesus to say, the old teaching of external service to God cannot be combined with my teaching of active love of one's neighbors. To unite my teaching with the old is like tearing a piece from a new garment and sewing it onto an old one. So, but this, he continues, should be seen in the light of Tolstoy's relationship with the church. You remember last time we saw that Tolstoy was actually kicked out of the church because he was so critical of it. And this is not the Catholic Church or the Reformation Church, it's the Eastern Orthodox Church. He says here, Tolstoy therefore excuses the Church of deliberately misleading Christians by pretending that fulfillment should mean that the law of Moses remains binding. Whenever a teacher preaches a new law of life, Tolstoy argues, he must necessarily annul the old. So in order to preach the new law, you have to abolish the old. So that's what he's saying. But then again, a little later we're going to see that Tolstoy and Ballou both kind of come to the same conclusions as everybody else about fulfilling the law. Now here's another fella. His name is Craig. He appears to disagree with this Tolstoy. For him, the above verses show that Jesus makes plain the continuity between his ministry and that of the Old Testament. So Craig is in the camp that says that the new and the old law are the same. So there's continuity between them. He believes that Jesus did not reject but defend the old law against the pseudo-righteousness of the Pharisees, and that this is visible, for instance, when Jesus says it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Jesus actually defends the law against the interpretation of his contemporary religious leaders. So he's opening up this idea now that the reason Jesus is reinterpreting the law is that the Pharisees and religious leaders were interpreting it in a way that was inconsistent with the intention from when God gave it to Moses. Yeah. And then we come to Yoder. Yoder we've met before. He is a writer who is in the camp that says that he calls it the direction, that the Old Testament law and the New Testament law are going in the same direction. And we actually met that when we talked about this in the Plan B study by Dave Andrews, that the intention of the law, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, doesn't matter, the intention was always justice. But it's doing it in different ways. He's not changing the law. There's still going to be justice. It's not, but it's doing it in a different way, the way it was really intended to be done. Skip this little part here. I think what he's critiquing is the rigid interpretation of the old law, not the old law's intention. So that's say that, you know, it's not the law itself that he's abolishing, but it's the intention. The interpretation of the law, not the intention of it. And then next comes this part where we see Baloo and Tolstoy coming to the same conclusion as the others. Yoder talks a little bit about lex talionis. We met that term also in the Plan B study, where the law is putting limitations on your revenge. Up until that point, it was normal for somebody who was who got angry and wanted to be justified, to retaliate in a more with a measure that was higher than the one that was done to him. The law says an eye for an eye. It has to be equal. You cannot take two eyes if you only lost one yourself. It has to be equal. That's the new thing. But now Jesus is taking it probably even several steps further, and where he says, he talks about anger. We talked about that last week, that it is unlawful to murder somebody, but the intention, the feelings and the things that lead to murder is anger. So if you're angry with your brother, then that might finally lead to your murdering him, and that's what the law prohibits. So it prohibits getting angry or getting out of control. Yeah. And that was actually the term that Dave Andrews used in that book, is blessed are the meek, because they exercise self-control. They don't get angry. They have a purpose. They have self-control, so they can purposely express their feeling that they have been wronged. But they don't get angry to the extent that they murder anybody. Okay, so all Christians, anarchists, appear to agree that when Jesus says that he fulfills the law, he radically interprets it according to its original intention. So that was the idea that Yoder brought up, that it was the intention, not the outward manifestation of that the Pharisees and the scribes were exercising. So, and that's wherein lies the continuity in the old and the new law, despite the different instructions. So yeah, that was a very difficult portion, and I probably did not do it justice at all, but definitely there's a lot to discuss in this chapter. Next week we're going to be talking about, it's kind of like a conclusion to this chapter is called Manifesto for Christian Anarchism. So this, we said all the time that the Sermon on the Mount sort of is a manual or manifesto for Christian anarchists. So we'll do that next week, and I look forward to seeing your comments. If you have any, go ahead and post them. After I have uploaded the video to the group.